Let the room grow quiet now. Let the day loosen its hold. Tonight, we are not beginning beside a battlefield, or at the edge of a sea, or beneath a mountain wrapped in fire. Tonight, the story begins in a palace of polished stone and carved pillars, a palace with curtains of fine linen and purple fabric, fastened by cords to silver rings, a palace where lamps burned late into the night, and servants crossed wide courtyards with careful steps, and powerful people spoke softly because soft words, in places like that, could still change the fate of nations. We are going to Susa, the citadel of the Persian Empire, the winter palace of a king whose reach stretched farther than most people could imagine. From India to Kush, across provinces and peoples and languages, the empire spread like a vast woven cloth. Roads ran through it, messengers rode through it, decrees moved through it with the weight of law. And somewhere within that empire, far from the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Jewish families lived as exiles and descendants of exiles. They were not in Jerusalem. Many had never seen Jerusalem. They knew the stories. They knew the names. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, the temple, the exile, the promises spoken by prophets. But they lived under foreign rule, among foreign customs, beneath the shadow of a foreign throne. And in the book of Esther, something unusual happens. The name of God is never directly spoken. Not once. No voice comes from a burning bush. No sea opens. No prophet stands in the court and says, "Thus says the Lord." No angel appears in the night to explain what is happening. On the surface, the story seems to move by choices, accidents, delays, pride, fear, sleeplessness, favor, timing, and courage. But if you listen carefully, if you let the story unfold slowly, you begin to feel the hidden hand underneath it all. The God who is not named is not absent. The God who is not visible is still working. And that is why Esther is a story for anyone who has ever lived in a season where heaven feels quiet. A season where the road does not announce its meaning. A season where no voice from the sky tells you exactly what to do, and yet you are still being led, still being positioned, still being called to courage in the place where you have been placed. So breathe slowly. Set down what you can set down. Let the palace doors open in your imagination. Do not hurry through the doorway. Let the first image come slowly. The outer walls, the guarded gates, the sound of sandals on stone, the soft movement of fabric in a night breeze. Somewhere in the distance, musicians may have played for a feast. Somewhere else, scribes may have bent over wax and parchment, copying words that would travel farther than their voices ever could. A palace is a place of beauty, but it is also a place of danger. People smile there carefully. They speak with measured phrases. They learn when to bow, when to wait, when to ask, and when to remain silent. A small error can become a public humiliation. A private anger can become a law. A passing favor can lift a person from obscurity, and a forgotten offense can return years later with teeth. This is where Esther's story unfolds, not in the open spaces of shepherds and flocks, but in rooms where doors matter. Who may enter? Who must wait outside? Who has been called? Who has not been called? Who speaks? Who is silenced? Who is seen? Who is hidden? The story of Esther is a story of thresholds. Vashti is commanded to cross one and refuses. Esther is taken across one and becomes queen. Mordecai cannot cross the gate in sackcloth. Esther must cross the inner court without being summoned. The Jews stand at the threshold between death and deliverance. And through every doorway, seen and unseen, providence moves. Let the night in Susa settle around you, and we will begin. The king was called Ahasuerus. Before his name enters the story, it helps to feel the world around him. Persia was not a small kingdom gathered around one city. It was an empire of distance. A message might begin in one language and be copied into many. A command might leave the king's palace and travel by horse through mountains, plains, deserts, and coastlands before it reached the people whose lives it would change. In that world, ordinary families could feel very small beneath the machinery of law. The Jews in that empire knew what it meant to be small in the eyes of power. They were a people with a story older than Persia, but not a people holding the throne. Some had returned to Judah in earlier days, but many remained scattered. They built houses. They raised children. They kept memories. They carried names from Israel while living under rulers who did not share their worship or their history. This is the world Esther enters. He ruled over a vast empire, and the book opens not with Esther, but with the king displaying his greatness. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media was there. Nobles and governors were there. Important men from distant provinces were gathered inside the citadel of Susa, where the empire could look at itself and admire its own splendor. For 180 days, the riches of the kingdom were displayed. That number is almost exhausting. 180 days. Enough time for admiration to turn into habit. Enough time for officials to grow used to splendor. Enough time for the king's greatness to be rehearsed again and again until everyone present understood the message. The empire was not merely wealthy. It was arranged to be seen as wealthy, not merely powerful, arranged to be felt as powerful. In a world like that, the Jewish people must have seemed very small. They had no throne in Susa, no army gathered under their own banner, no temple standing in the middle of the Persian court. They were scattered among other peoples, speaking the languages of exile, living ordinary lives beneath an empire that could celebrate itself for half a year without thinking of them at all. But the size of the empire is not the measure of the story. That is one of the quiet comforts of Esther. The first chapter shows power in its most glittering form, so that later, when everything turns on an orphan girl, a sleepless night, and a forgotten record, we will understand that the hidden God is not intimidated by what human beings call great. Half a year of power being shown. Half a year of wealth made visible. Treasuries, garments, honor, rank, military strength. The glory of an empire arranged for the eyes of men who understood what the display meant. Persia was saying something without needing to put it into a single sentence. Look how secure we are. Look how wide our borders reach. Look how much the king possesses. Look how permanent all of this seems. Then, when those days were finished, the king gave another feast. This one lasted 7 days and was held for all the people present in Susa, from the greatest to the least. The setting was beautiful. White cotton curtains, violet hangings, silver rods, marble pillars, couches of gold and silver placed on pavement of precious stone, drinks served in golden vessels, each vessel different from the next, wine poured generously by the king's command. Nothing was restrained except perhaps wisdom. The king's law was that no one should be compelled to drink. Everyone could do as he wished. And in that atmosphere of luxury and excess, Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace. So there were 2 feasts, in a sense. The king feasted with the men, surrounded by officials, commanders, nobles, and servants of power. The queen feasted with the women, inside the royal house, in another sphere of the palace. The story does not describe her feast with the same detail, but it lets us know that she too had a place, a court, a dignity attached to her position. Vashti is not introduced as a nameless figure in the background. She is queen. She hosts. She is visible within her own sphere before she is commanded to become visible in the king's. And that makes the next moment sharper. Because the king's command is not given in quiet honor. It comes after days of drinking, at the end of excess, when his heart is merry with wine, and his desire is to display her beauty before others. The court sees a command. Vashti sees something else, and whatever all her reasons may have been, she refuses. The refusal is brief in the text, but the consequences fill the palace. Vashti was queen before Esther. The story does not tell us everything about Vashti's heart. It does not ask us to follow her for years or sit beside her after the decree. It simply shows us the moment when she refused the command of a king who had turned his palace into a theater of himself. She disappears from the narrative, but the empty space left by her removal becomes the doorway through which Esther will later enter. That is one reason this story feels so real. People make choices for reasons that may be proud, foolish, wounded, political, or personal. Courts respond. laws are written, lives are moved. And beneath all of that, God can be arranging a rescue that no one yet sees. She is not in the story for long, but her place matters. She stands at the doorway of everything that comes next. On the seventh day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he commanded 7 officials to bring Queen Vashti before him, wearing the royal crown, so the peoples and princes could see her beauty. The request was not a private invitation. It was a command given in the middle of public intoxication and display. The king had shown his wealth, his empire, his power. Now he wanted to show the beauty of his queen as though she were another treasure in the palace. But Vashti refused to come. That refusal moved through the palace like a sudden silence. In an ordinary house, a wife refusing a foolish request might have ended with argument or embarrassment. But in a royal court, surrounded by officials, every gesture becomes larger than itself. The king became furious. His anger burned in him. And because kings like Ahasuerus did not make even personal embarrassments quietly, he turned the matter into counsel and law. The wise men who knew the times were called. In courts, wise men are not always wise in the way Scripture values wisdom. They may know law. They may know precedent. They may know how to read the king's mood and how to protect their own place near power. They may be skilled at turning embarrassment into policy. But that is not the same thing as righteousness. It is not the same thing as justice. It is not the same thing as the fear of the Lord. The advisors around Ahasuerus respond to Vashti's refusal as though the stability of every household in the empire now depends on one queen being removed. They turn a moment of wounded pride into a public decree. They do what insecure power often does. It makes an example. And because the king is king, their counsel becomes law. A domestic humiliation becomes an imperial message. That is the world Esther is about to enter. A world where personal moods can become public danger. A world where a ring and a seal can turn anger into death for others. A world where the next queen will need more than beauty to survive. They spoke as court advisors often speak, not merely to answer a question, but to protect the order of the world as they understand it. Vashti's refusal, they said, was not only against the king. It was against all the officials and all the peoples of the provinces. If the queen's conduct became known, women everywhere would look with contempt on their husbands. The whole empire would be unsettled by a queen who had said no. That may sound exaggerated. It probably was. But fear often exaggerates when power feels embarrassed. So a decree was written. Vashti would never again come before King Ahasuerus. Her royal position would be given to someone better than she. The decree was sent throughout the empire, written into the laws of Persia and Media, which could not be revoked. And just like that, a throne beside the king became empty. No one in the palace understood what that emptiness would become. No one saw Esther yet. No one saw the Jewish girl in Susa whose life, quietly and without her choosing, was about to move toward the center of the empire. That is how providence often begins in this story. Not with music, not with a miracle. With an opening no one knows how to interpret. Vashti is removed. The court moves on. The feast ends. The king's anger eventually cools. The palace returns to its rhythms. But an unseen thread has been laid down, and the story is going to follow it. After these things, when the anger of the king had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what had been decreed against her. His young men proposed a search. Beautiful young women from across the empire should be gathered to Susa, placed under the care of the keeper of the women, and given cosmetics and preparations. The young woman who pleased the king would become queen in Vashti's place. The proposal pleased the king. The search for a new queen may sound romantic if told too quickly, but Esther's story is not a simple tale of a girl entering a palace because she wanted splendor. The empire gathers young women into the royal system. Their lives are redirected by a king's desire and by the machinery of court officials. The story moves with restraint, but beneath that restraint is the vulnerability of women whose futures are being decided inside a world built around royal preference. Esther is favored in that world, but favor does not mean the world itself is gentle. She is taken. That word matters. She does not begin by choosing the palace. The palace takes her in. And yet, even in a place she did not choose, God can position her for a purpose she could not yet imagine. This does not make the taking right. It means the taking is not stronger than the providence of God. That is a hard and hopeful truth. Hard, because the road may include things a person would never have chosen. Hopeful, because even there, the hidden God can still work. So the search began. Across the provinces, girls were gathered. Some may have come with ambition, some with fear, some with families who saw opportunity, some with no choice at all. The story does not slow down to tell us each of them, but each had a name, a home, a memory, a life before the palace. They were taken into the machinery of empire, into the carefully controlled world of beauty, favor, access, and royal selection. And in Susa there was a Jewish man named Mordecai. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, descended from exiles, carried away from Jerusalem when the king of Babylon took the people into captivity. Mordecai lived in the citadel. Mordecai's life was shaped by exile even before Esther's crisis began. The exile was not merely a date in a history scroll. It was a family memory. Jerusalem had fallen. Kings had been carried away. The temple had been destroyed and later restored in part, but the wound of displacement remained in the people. They knew that disobedience had led their fathers into judgment, but they also knew the promises of mercy had not died. So Mordecai lived with two truths. He lived in Persia, and he belonged to Israel. The streets beneath his feet were Persian streets, but the story beneath his life was the story of Abraham's God. Close enough to the structures of Persian power to understand how dangerous they could be, but still belonging to a people whose deepest identity came from somewhere else. He was raising his cousin Hadassah. Her Persian name was Esther. She had no father and no mother. When her parents died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. That detail should be allowed to rest gently in the story. Before Esther was queen, she was an orphan. It is easy to let the crown overshadow the orphaned girl, but the story does not. Before royal robes, there was loss. Before banquets, there was absence. Before she stood in the inner court, she had already learned that life could change without asking permission. Her parents had died. The home that should have held her from childhood into adulthood had been broken open by grief. Mordecai became her guardian, but that did not erase what had been lost. This matters because Esther's courage later is not the courage of someone untouched by sorrow. It is the courage of someone who has already lived through uncertainty. Someone who knows what it is to be dependent. Someone who has been sheltered by another's faithfulness. Someone who has carried identity quietly beneath another name. Hadassah became Esther in the eyes of Persia, but the orphaned child was never invisible to God. That is important. The world may first notice a person when beauty, status, or usefulness appears. God sees before that. God sees the child before the crown, the hidden years before the public moment, the losses before the calling, the tears that never become part of a royal announcement. Before she was chosen, she had already lost. Before her name was spoken in the palace, she had known the quiet ache of absence. Father gone, mother gone, the ordinary shelter of childhood broken. And yet she was not abandoned. Mordecai took her in. He raised her. He watched over her with the care of a man who understood that family is not only blood and name, but responsibility, faithfulness, and the daily work of love. Hadassah, Esther, one name from her people, one name in the empire. That double naming matters. She lives between worlds, a Jewish girl in a Persian city, a child of exile inside an empire that does not know her God, a young woman whose outer life will soon be shaped by palace customs, while her hidden identity remains tied to a covenant older than Persia. Esther was beautiful in form and appearance. When the king's command was proclaimed, Esther was taken into the palace and placed under the care of Hegai, who had charge of the women. She pleased him and won his favor. He quickly provided her with cosmetics and food and gave her 7 chosen young women from the palace. He moved her and her attendants to the best place in the house of the women. Again, favor appears quietly. It comes through Hegai's response to her, through practical provision, through a better place within the house, through attendants given to help her. None of these things look like the dividing of a sea. None would make a court historian pause and say that heaven had entered the room. But Esther's story teaches us to pay attention to small favor, a keeper's kindness, a a better room, the right advice at the right time, a hidden identity protected, a guardian still walking outside. When God is hidden in the narrative, these small mercies become especially meaningful. They do not shout, they accumulate, they form a path. Esther's rise is not presented as ambition alone. It is a sequence of favor in places where she is vulnerable. Favor does not remove the risk of the palace, but it gives her room to stand within it. Already, favor is moving. Quietly. No thunder, no spoken divine name, but favor. Esther had not made known her people or her kindred because Mordecai had instructed her not to reveal it. So she entered the palace carrying a hidden identity. Every day Mordecai walked. There is no grand speech attached to those daily walks. No one builds a monument to them. No court historian would think them important. But the quiet faithfulness of Mordecai matters. The great turning of the story will come later, but long before that, Mordecai is simply being faithful in the ordinary thing given to him, caring for Esther as best he can from the outside. Many lives are held together by such ordinary faithfulness. The repeated walk, the repeated question, the refusal to let love become vague. In front of the court of the women to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Every day. That is love in one of its most ordinary forms. A man walking the same path again and again because someone he loves is inside a place he cannot enter. He cannot control the palace. He cannot undo the empire's command. He cannot stand beside Esther in the rooms where she is being prepared, but he can walk nearby. He can ask. He can keep watch. He can refuse to let her be forgotten. Esther's preparation lasted 12 months. 6 months with oil of myrrh. 6 months with spices and cosmetics. A year of waiting before one night with the king. The palace trained beauty into ceremony. Every movement was arranged. Every woman was allowed to take with her whatever she wished from the house of the women to the king's palace. In the evening she went in, and in the morning she returned to another house under the care of a different official. Unless the king delighted in her and called her by name, she did not return to him. There is sadness beneath the elegance of that system. A young woman's future resting on one evening. A palace full of names, hopes, fear, and uncertainty. A king whose favor could lift or bury a life. Esther moved through that world carefully. When her turn came, she asked for nothing except what Haggai advised. That tells us something about her. She was not grasping, not dramatic, not trying to overwhelm the room with display. She moved with a quiet wisdom, willing to receive counsel. That is a rare strength. Some people, when placed near opportunity, begin grasping at anything that might make them more impressive. Esther does not. She trusts the counsel of someone who understands the palace better than she does. She lets wisdom guide beauty. She does not confuse favor with self-display. In a place built on appearance, Esther's restraint becomes part of her beauty. The text says she obtained favor in the eyes of all who saw her. That does not mean she performed for everyone. It suggests a presence, a grace, a steadiness that people noticed. She was not only physically beautiful, there was something in the way she carried herself. Quietness can be powerful. Gentleness can have weight. A person does not have to fill every space with their own voice in order to be seen by God or used by him. Esther enters the king's presence with less than she could have demanded and receives more than she could have secured by grasping. And everyone who saw her found favor in her. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in the 10th month, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther more than all the women. She won grace and favor in his sight more than all the others, and he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Ahasuerus gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. Esther's feast, it was called. He granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. The orphan girl had become Queen of Persia. Imagine Mordecai hearing it. The girl he had raised as his own daughter now wore the crown of Persia. The child of his household had been lifted into a place he could not have arranged. His daily walks near the court had not been wasted. His concern had not been forgotten. But joy in Esther's rise would have come mixed with caution, because the palace was still the palace. A crown does not make danger disappear. Sometimes it brings danger closer. Esther is safer in one sense and more exposed in another. She is honored, but she is also watched. She has influence, but only within the strange limits of royal favor. She is queen, but not sovereign. She is near the king, but not free from his laws. That tension will define the rest of her story. She is inside the place of power, but the place of power is not fully safe. But the story is careful. Esther still had not made known her kindred or her people. Mordecai's instruction remained. The secret remained. She wore the crown, but there was something hidden beneath it. The court saw a queen. Mordecai knew a daughter. God saw the whole story from beginning to end, and still the hidden hand moved. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, the king's gate was not simply a doorway. It was a place of official life. Matters were heard there. Servants of the king gathered there. News moved there. Mordecai's presence at the gate suggests some recognized position or access within the structures of the citadel. He is not inside the throne room, but he is not far from power's outer edge. That position matters too. Esther is in the palace. Mordecai is at the gate. One hidden inside royal favor. One seated at the threshold of royal administration. Neither of them knows yet how these positions will matter, but both have been placed where information can move through them. Mordecai hears of a plot because he is where he is. Esther can report it because she is where she is. A king's life is preserved because two exiles are positioned in the right places. Two of the king's officials became angry and plotted to lay hands on Ahasuerus. Mordecai learned of it. He told Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in Mordecai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be true. The men were punished, and the event was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Written down, but not rewarded. That is important. Mordecai saved the king's life, and the deed was recorded, then left waiting in a book. No feast, no honor, no immediate promotion, just ink on a scroll somewhere in the palace records. Another thread. Mordecai probably did not know how much that unrewarded moment would matter. He had done the right thing, and then watched the palace continue without honoring him. That can be difficult. Faithfulness without recognition is one of the quiet tests of character. It asks whether a person will still do what is right when no applause follows, no reward comes, and no one seems to remember. Mordecai's deed was written down. Then the scroll was closed. But heaven had not forgotten what the court had left unread. Another small thing that seems unfinished. In the story of Esther, delays matter. Forgotten records matter. Sleepless nights matter. The timing of honor matters. The thing not rewarded today may be exactly the thing God brings forward at the right hour. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman. The story does not explain why Haman is promoted. It simply says he is lifted up. That too feels like real life. Sometimes people of dangerous character rise. Sometimes arrogant men gain access. Sometimes the person least safe with power is given more of it. Scripture does not pretend that promotion always reveals virtue. Haman's elevation is not proof of his righteousness. It is the setting in which his pride will be exposed. He is raised high enough for his fall to be seen. But before the fall, his promotion is terrifying. He receives honor from the king. He receives public homage. The servants at the gate bow because the king has commanded it. His ego is fed by law itself. And a man whose pride has become attached to public reverence will not respond calmly when one person refuses. Haman was the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. He was advanced above all the officials who were with him. All the king's servants at the gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman because the king had commanded it. But Mordecai did not bow down. The text does not give a long explanation for Mordecai's refusal. It simply places his refusal before us, steady and immovable. Perhaps the honor Haman demanded crossed a line Mordecai could not cross. Perhaps Haman's identity as an Agagite, connected in memory with old enemies of Israel, sharpened the matter. Whatever the full reason, Mordecai would not give Haman what Haman wanted. And sometimes the whole shape of a crisis begins with one person refusing to bend where conscience will not permit it. He would not pay homage. The servants at the king's gate asked him why he disobeyed the command. Day after day they spoke to him, but he would not listen. He had told them he was a Jew. They reported it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow, he was filled with fury. A smaller man might have taken revenge on Mordecai alone. But Haman's hatred is not proportionate. That is what makes it monstrous. One man refuses him, and Haman dreams of genocide. One Jewish man will not bow, and Haman seeks the destruction of every Jewish child, mother, father, elder, and household across the empire. His wounded pride becomes a weapon aimed at an entire people. The book wants us to see the absurdity and horror of this. Haman is powerful in the court, but he is enslaved to his own need for honor. He can walk past rows of people bowing and feel nothing if Mordecai remains seated. He has the king's favor, but not peace. Wealth, sons, status, and access cannot quiet the hunger of a proud heart. Pride is a poor god. It demands endlessly and gives no rest. Haman's pride was larger and darker than that. He despised the idea of laying hands on Mordecai only. Since he had been told who Mordecai's people were, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. All of them. Not only the man at the gate, the whole people. This is what pride can become when wounded by one faithful refusal. It inflates itself into hatred. It cannot endure being denied. Haman stood high in the empire, honored by the king, feared by officials, surrounded by status, and yet one man who would not bow became unbearable to him. So he sought a date. Lots were cast before Haman, day after day and month after month, until the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. The Persian word was per, a lot, a small object cast to decide a time. To Haman, it was strategy. To the story, it will become the name of remembered deliverance. Then Haman went to the king. He did not name the people at first. He described them as scattered and dispersed among the provinces, with laws different from every other people. He said they did not keep the king's laws, and that it was not in the king's interest to tolerate them. If it pleased the king, he said, let an order be written that they be destroyed. He even offered a huge sum of silver to be paid into the royal treasury. The king gave him the signet ring. The signet ring is one of the most frightening objects in the book. It is small enough to fit on a hand, but it carries the weight of empire. With it, a command can become law. A private hatred can be translated into official language. A seal pressed into wax can send terror through provinces that have never seen Haman's face. Ahasuerus gives the ring too easily. That is part of the danger. The king does not search deeply. He does not ask the name of the people. He does not weigh the moral horror of what is being proposed. He hears the language of political inconvenience and administrative order, and he hands over authority. Sometimes evil advances not only because of active hatred, but because of careless power. Haman hates. The king permits. The scribes write. The couriers ride. And a people begins to mourn. The ring of authority. The power to write death into law. The king told Haman to keep the silver and do as he wished with the people. So the scribes were called. A decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the satraps, governors, and officials of every province, in the script of every people and the language of every nation. It was sealed with the king's ring. Couriers carried the letters through the empire, ordering that all Jews, young and old, women and children, were to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated on one day, the 13th day of Adar, and that their goods were to be plundered. The decree went out. Susa was thrown into confusion, but the king and Haman sat down to drink. That is one of the darkest contrasts in the book. A people sentenced to death, a city bewildered, and two men sitting down with wine. Power can become frighteningly calm when it has distanced itself from the suffering it creates. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. He went out into the middle of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. He came as far as the king's gate, but no one clothed in sackcloth could enter the gate. Throughout every province, imagine the decree arriving in distant places. A courier comes into a city. Officials gather. The seal is broken. The words are read. Families hear the date. The 12th month. The 13th day. One day marked for destruction. The language is official. but the terror is personal. Mothers count children. Fathers look at doorways. Elders remember earlier griefs. Young people ask questions no one wants to answer. The empire had spoken death over them, and for a while, nothing outward changed. The sun still rose. Markets still opened. People still passed one another in the streets. But for the Jews, every ordinary day now stood beneath the shadow of a coming date. Wherever the command came, there was great mourning among the Jews. Fasting, weeping, lamenting. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. The hidden identity of Esther now stood at the edge of crisis. She was queen, but she was also Jewish. She was inside the palace. Her people were outside under death. Her young women and officials told her about Mordecai, and the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe him and remove his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. That is understandable. There are griefs clothing cannot cover. Esther's first response is compassionate, but incomplete. She hears Mordecai is in sackcloth, and she sends garments. It is the natural impulse of someone inside the palace trying to remove visible distress. But Mordecai refuses the clothing because the problem is not the sackcloth. The sackcloth is telling the truth. To remove it without addressing the decree would only cover the sign of grief while leaving the cause untouched. This is a turning point for Esther's understanding. She must learn what has happened beyond the walls. The palace can insulate a person from suffering. Cushions, servants, routines, perfumes, and royal schedules can make the outside world feel distant. Mordecai's refusal pulls the outside world into Esther's attention. Her people are in danger. The crisis cannot be dressed away. Esther then sent Hathach, one of the king's officials assigned to attend her, to find out what was happening. Mordecai told him everything. He gave the amount of silver Haman had promised. He gave a copy of the decree. He commanded Esther to go to the king, to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. Hathach brought the message to Esther. Esther sent a reply. All the king's servants and the people of the provinces knew the law. If any man or woman went to the king inside the inner court without being called, there was only one law: death. Unless the king held out the golden scepter. Esther had not been called to come to the king for 30 days. This is the human weight of the story. It is easy, after knowing the ending, to rush Esther toward courage as though courage were simple. But the fear in Esther's answer is reasonable. The inner court is not just another room. It is a boundary guarded by law. To cross it uncalled is to place one's life in the king's response. Esther cannot assume that being queen guarantees welcome. Vashti had been queen too, and her refusal had ended her royal life. Esther knows that favor in the past does not make tomorrow's favor certain. The king has not called for her. 30 days is a long silence in the palace. Was she still favored? Had someone else taken his attention? Would he be pleased to see her, or irritated by her boldness? Would the scepter rise? Or would guards move toward her? Courage grows most honestly when danger is seen clearly. Esther sees it. But Esther was not being asked to make a speech in safety. She was being asked to walk into the inner court, uncalled, in a palace governed by whim and law, before a king who had already removed one queen. She knew what had happened to Vashti. She knew Persian law. She knew the danger of approaching without invitation. And she had not been summoned for a month. Mordecai's answer came back with force. Do not imagine that you will escape in the palace more than all the Jews. If you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? For such a time as this. Mordecai's words do not flatter Esther. They awaken her. He does not say, "You are safe because you are queen." He says the opposite. Do not assume the palace will save you. The decree reaches farther than comfort. It reaches into hidden identity. It reaches into the place where Esther has been silent. She must decide whether her crown is only a shelter or also a responsibility. That is a searching question. Every gift can become either a hiding place or a place of service. Beauty, influence, access, education, position, timing. A door opened in front of you. Esther's crown becomes holy, not because the Persian court is holy, but because she uses her place to plead for life. Those words have outlived empires. Mordecai does not say he understands everything. He does not say the path is safe. He does not even place the entire future of the Jewish people on Esther's courage, as though God has no other way. Relief will come from another place if she is silent. The covenant people will not disappear because Haman hates them. But Esther has been placed somewhere. Her crown is not accidental. Her crown is not merely decoration. The favor that brought her into the palace may have been preparing her for this exact hour. And that is one of the great questions of Esther. What if the place you did not choose becomes the place where courage is required of you? What if the hidden years, the losses, the favor, the strange turns of the road, the doors that opened and the doors that closed have quietly positioned you for a moment when silence would be easier? But faithfulness means speaking? Esther sent her answer to Mordecai. Go, gather all the Jews in Susa. Fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. If I perish, I perish. Not despair. Those words, if I perish, do not mean Esther has stopped valuing her life. They mean she has found something worth risking life for. There is a difference. Despair throws life away because it sees no meaning. Faithful courage offers life because meaning has become clear. Esther does not know whether she will be spared. She does not know whether the king will listen. She does not know whether her words will overturn the path of death already written. But she knows that silence would be its own kind of death. So she chooses the dangerous obedience in front of her. Not the whole future, just the next faithful step. Not recklessness. Surrender. The words of someone who has counted the cost and decided that obedience matters more than survival as the highest good. Esther is not fearless. The sentence would mean very little if she were. She knows the danger. She knows the law. She knows the silence of the palace and the sharp edge of royal favor. And still, she chooses to go. For 3 days, Susa holds its breath. Fasting slows a person down. It makes need visible. It strips away some of the false strength that food and routine can give. Esther's fast is not only a private religious act, it is a communal act of dependence. The queen will step into the court, but she will not step in alone. Her people will be with her in hunger. Mordecai will be with her in waiting. Her young women will be with her in the palace. Courage may look solitary in the moment of action, but often, unseen behind courage, there is a whole community of prayer, fasting, counsel, and love. Somewhere in the city, Jewish families fast. Mordecai waits. Esther waits inside the palace. The young women around her fast with her. The lamps burn. Servants move quietly. The king continues in the rhythms of royal life, unaware that the queen is preparing to risk everything in the inner court. The book never says they prayed, but fasting in Israel's story is rarely empty. It is hunger turned toward heaven. It is the body saying what the mouth may not know how to say. It is weakness chosen because human strength is not enough. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes. The robe is a quiet image of calling. Esther has been fasting, but she does not enter looking defeated. She has been afraid, but she does not enter as though she has no place there. She puts on the garments of the role given to her. She does not deny her weakness. She clothes herself for the work. There is something beautiful in that. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes courage fasts in private, trembles in private, then dresses for obedience and walks steadily into the public room. The attendants may have arranged the fabric around her. The crown may have been set in place. Every detail of royal appearance may have been prepared as usual, and yet this day was not usual. This was not a court ceremony for display. This was a woman walking toward possible death for the sake of her people. That detail matters. She does not go dressed in mourning. She does not enter the court with sackcloth on her body. She goes as queen. She takes the place that has been given to her and wears it fully. The crown, the robes, the quiet dignity of her office. She does not know whether the king will receive her, but she steps into the inner court facing the king's hall. The king sat on his royal throne, facing the entrance. He saw Queen Esther standing in the court, and she won favor in his sight. The king held out the golden scepter. Life extended itself toward her. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The first danger had passed. Imagine the breath she may have been holding. The sight of the scepter changes the room. One moment, every step could be her last. The next, the king's gesture gives permission to live and speak. Esther comes forward and touches the tip of the gold. It is a small movement, but it completes the passage from danger into audience. Still, she does not spill everything at once. She has come through the first door. There will be another. The scepter gives access, but wisdom must shape what she does with access. This is one of the reasons Esther's courage is so compelling. She is brave, but not careless. Bold, but not reckless. She trusts enough to step forward, and she waits enough to speak in the right hour. Not the whole danger, only the first. The king asked what troubled her. What was her request? Even up to half the kingdom, he said, it would be given to her. Esther did not immediately reveal Haman. She invited the king and Haman to a feast she had prepared. There is wisdom in the delay. Esther's timing is one of the quiet arts of the story. She does not mistake urgency for haste. The danger is urgent, but the approach must still be wise. Haman's pride needs room to ripen. The king's attention needs room to settle. Esther knows that a careless accusation in the wrong moment could cost everything. So she waits one more day, one more feast, one more night. And in that one night, the king will not sleep. Courage does not always mean speaking everything at the first possible moment. Sometimes courage prepares the room. Sometimes it moves patiently. Esther has stepped into danger, but she does not rush the accusation. She invites. She waits. She gives the king's curiosity time to deepen. She gives Haman's pride room to expose itself. The king and Haman came to the feast. Picture that first banquet quietly. The table prepared. The wine poured. The queen seated with a calmness that must have cost her something. The king, curious and pleased to be invited. Haman, swelling with the private delight of being singled out. No one else in the room knows that Esther is carrying a death decree in her heart. No one sees the 3 days of fasting behind her face. No one hears the prayers implied by hunger or the fear she has already crossed to stand there. A feast can hide many things. In the first chapter, feasts displayed the king's power. Here, a feast becomes the setting for hidden courage. Esther is not merely hosting, she is discerning. She is watching the king, watching Haman, waiting for the moment when the truth can be spoken with full force. Her silence at the first banquet is not weakness, it is preparation. There are times when wisdom speaks by waiting one more night. Again the king asked her request. Again he offered generosity. Esther invited them to another feast the next day, promising that then she would answer. Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. Joyful and glad of heart. The words almost sting because the reader knows what Haman does not. He believes the banquet proves his rising glory. He believes the queen's invitation has placed him in a circle of privilege no one else can enter. His heart is full of himself. He walks out carrying the taste of wine, honor, and imagined greatness. Then Mordecai sits. That is all. Mordecai does not attack him. He does not shout. He simply does not rise or tremble. And Haman's gladness collapses into fury. It shows how fragile pride's happiness really is. If one unbowed man can destroy it, then it was never true joy. It was dependence on worship. He had been invited privately with the king to the queen's banquet and invited again. His sense of importance swelled. He had honor, rank, access, wealth, sons, promotion, the king's favor, and now the queen's attention. Then he saw Mordecai at the king's gate. Mordecai did not rise. He did not tremble. And Haman was filled with wrath. But he restrained himself and went home. He called his friends and his wife Zeresh. Home should have been a place where Haman's heart was corrected. It was not. The people around him fed what was worst in him. They listened to the list of his honors. They heard how one man at the gate made all of it feel empty. Instead of telling him that his soul had become captive to pride, they gave pride a plan. Build high, ask early, remove Mordecai, then go to the feast happy. This is what dangerous counsel does. It does not heal the wound. It sharpens it into a weapon. The gallows, or wooden stake, rises in the night because everyone around Haman agrees with his bitterness. No one says, enough. No one says, your honor is not worth a man's blood. No one says, you have mistaken humiliation for injustice. So the wood is prepared, and the night continues. In another part of the city, Mordecai may sleep or keep watch without knowing what has been built for him. Esther may rest before the second banquet without knowing exactly how the next day will unfold. The Jews of Susa continue under the shadow of the decree. Haman's servants finish the structure, and in the palace, the king cannot sleep. He recounted the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how the queen had invited no one but him to come with the king to her feast. Yet all this, he said, was worth nothing to him as long as he saw Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. That sentence reveals the poverty of pride. Haman had almost everything a courtier could want, and one unbowed man made it taste like nothing. His wife and friends advised him to build a gallows or a high wooden structure, 50 cubits high, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then he could go joyfully with the king to the feast. The advice pleased Haman, so the gallows was made. That night, the king could not sleep. Think of how small that sentence is beside the size of the rescue that follows. A sleepless night, a scroll chosen, a page reached, a question asked. Nothing in it looks dramatic while it is happening. A servant does not know, as he lifts the chronicles, that he is holding the hinge of deliverance. The reader does not know, as he begins to recite old records, that one forgotten paragraph will overturn the plans of a murderous man. The king does not know, as he listens in the dark, that his restlessness is being used to protect a people. But the story turns there. This is perhaps the quietest turning point in the whole book. No army moves, no angel descends, no prophet speaks. A king cannot sleep. That is all. A restless night in a palace, the kind of thing that happens to people all the time and seems too ordinary to carry destiny. The king lies awake, and perhaps the lamps burn low, and the silence of the palace deepens. Since sleep will not come, he commands that the book of memorable deeds, the chronicles, be brought and read before him. Scrolls are opened, records are read. And in the reading, they find the account of Mordecai exposing the plot of the two officials who sought to harm the king. The king asks what honor or distinction was given to Mordecai for this. Nothing, the servants say. Nothing had been done. The forgotten record rises at the exact time it is needed. The unrewarded deed comes forward on the night before Haman plans to ask for Mordecai's death. This is Esther's hidden providence in miniature. A sleepless king, a chosen scroll, a remembered rescue, a delayed honor. The timing is so precise that it becomes almost louder than thunder. The king asks who is in the court. Haman has just arrived. He has come early to ask the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows he built. The servants say Haman is there. The king tells them to bring him in. Before Haman can speak his request, the king asks him, what should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Haman thinks, who would the king delight to honor more than me? Pride answers questions before it hears them fully. So Haman describes the honor he secretly wants for himself. Let royal robes be brought, the kind the king has worn. Let a horse be brought, the kind the king has ridden, with a royal crown on its head. Let one of the king's most noble officials dress the man and lead him on horseback through the square, proclaiming that this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. The king likes the answer. The question had been simple. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? But Haman's heart turned it into a mirror. He saw himself in the question before he knew whom it concerned. This is the blindness pride creates. It assumes the center. It cannot imagine that honor might be intended for someone else. It cannot hear a sentence without asking how it might serve the self. So Haman designs his own fantasy of glory. Royal robes, a royal horse, a public procession, a noble official proclaiming honor. He does not ask for money because he already has wealth. He does not ask for safety because he feels secure. He asks for visible elevation, to be seen wearing what belongs to the king, to be paraded, to hear the city acknowledge him. And then the king gives that exact honor to Mordecai. The punishment is perfectly fitted to the pride. Haman must honor the man whose honor he could not endure. Hurry, he says, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing you mentioned, Mordecai. The name must have struck Haman like a blow. The man he came to destroy is the man he must honor. Try to picture the walk through Susa. Mordecai on the horse, Haman holding the reins or walking near enough to lead. The proclamation forced from Haman's mouth again and again. People in the square turning to look, servants whispering, officials noticing. The Jew at the gate now clothed in honor by command of the king. And Haman cannot explain. He cannot tell the crowd that he had built a gallows at home. He cannot say that he came to the palace to ask for Mordecai's death. He must perform honor while humiliation burns through him. The reversal has begun before Esther ever names him at the feast. God is already turning the story. The gallows stands ready at home. The morning request dies in his throat. Haman takes the robes and the horse. He dresses Mordecai. He leads him through the city square. With his own mouth, he proclaims honor over the man he hates. This is not merely irony. It is reversal. The beginning of the great turning that runs through the rest of the book. Haman rose by pride, and pride has begun to bend him downward. Mordecai sat in sackcloth, and now he is clothed in royal honor. The empire that carried the death decree now carries a public proclamation over the faithful Jew at the gate. Mordecai returns to the king's gate. Haman hurries home mourning, with his head covered. His wife and wise men tell him that if Mordecai is of the Jewish people, before whom he has begun to fall, he will not overcome him. He will surely fall before him. While they are still speaking, the king's officials arrive and hurry Haman to Esther's second feast. The day is closing around him. He does not know it yet. The king and Haman come to drink wine with Queen Esther. Again, the king asks her request. Up to half the kingdom, he says, it will be granted. Now the moment has come. This is the second threshold. The first was physical, Esther entering the inner court. The second is verbal, Esther speaking the truth. Some dangers are crossed by walking, others by naming. Esther must now reveal what has been hidden. She must name her people. She must connect herself to the condemned. She must place her life inside the decree and ask the king to see that the death order is not abstract policy, but a knife pointed at the queen in front of him. This is costly speech. Once spoken, it cannot be taken back. Esther cannot return to being merely the pleasing queen of unknown origin. Her identity, her people, her grief, and her request are now in the open. Esther answers, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. My life, my people. For we have been sold," she says, "to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." The words of Haman's decree return in the mouth of the queen. She does not begin with politics. She begins with life. She does not speak as a distant advocate only. She reveals that the decree has reached into the palace itself. The queen is one of the people marked for death. The king asks who has presumed to do this. Esther says, a foe and enemy. This wicked Haman. Haman is terrified before the king and queen. Terror comes to him suddenly. For months, he has dealt in the terror of others. He has written it into law. He has carried it with a ring. He has slept with a date on the calendar that meant death for children he never met. Now terror enters his own body. The room he thought was honor becomes judgment. The queen he thought admired him becomes the voice of accusation. The king, whose favor lifted him, becomes the danger before him. This is another reversal. The maker of fear becomes afraid. The accuser is exposed. The hidden identity of Esther becomes the undoing of Haman's hidden hatred. The room has turned completely. The man who entered the banquet, honored above others, is now exposed before the queen he meant to destroy without knowing her name. The king rises in wrath and goes into the palace garden. Haman stays to beg Esther for his life, because he sees that harm has been determined against him. When the king returns, Haman has fallen on the couch where Esther is. The king reads the moment as another offense. Harbona, one of the officials, mentions the gallows Haman made for Mordecai. the man who spoke good on behalf of the king. It stands at Haman's house, 50 cubits high. The king says, "Hang him on that." So they do. Haman is hanged on the structure he prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's anger subsides. But the danger is not over. This is important. Haman is dead, but the decree remains. The law has gone out in the king's name and been sealed with the king's ring. In Persia, such a decree cannot simply be erased. The date still stands. The enemies of the Jews still have royal permission to attack. The empire still carries death in writing. Esther and Mordecai must continue. On that day, the king gives Esther the house of Haman. Mordecai comes before the king because Esther has revealed what he is to her. The king takes off the signet ring that had been taken from Haman and gives it to Mordecai. Esther sets Mordecai over Haman's house. Another reversal. The ring that wrote death now rests with the man who will write deliverance. The ring changes hands, and the whole moral direction of authority changes with it. In Haman's hand, the ring became a tool of destruction. In Mordecai's hand, it becomes a tool of preservation. The object itself has not changed. The seal is still royal. The authority is still Persian. But the character of the one using authority matters. Power is never neutral in practice. It bends toward the heart that holds it. Haman used access to magnify grievance. Mordecai uses access to seek the welfare of his people. The same empire that endangered the Jews now becomes, by reversal, the channel through which their defense is authorized. The house of the enemy is placed under the care of the people he meant to destroy. But Esther does not stop with her own safety or Mordecai's honor. She goes again before the king. She falls at his feet and weeps, pleading with him to avert the evil plan of Haman and the plot against the Jews. The king holds out the golden scepter again. Esther rises and speaks. She asks that an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman. How can she bear to see disaster fall on her people? How can she endure the destruction of her kindred? The king cannot revoke the earlier decree. This detail makes the final part of the story more tense. If the king could simply cancel the first decree, the danger would end at once. But the law of the empire has trapped even the king inside his own sealed word. The letters written in his name cannot be unwritten. The royal machinery that made death official cannot simply pretend it never spoke. So deliverance must come another way. A second decree. Not erasing the existence of the first, but overcoming its effect. This is why the story still has a date of battle. The people will not be saved by the disappearance of all hostility. They will be saved by being given authority to stand together against it. The danger remains real, but the people are no longer powerless beneath it. There is wisdom in that too. Sometimes rescue does not mean no conflict. Sometimes rescue means strength, permission, unity, and courage when the conflict arrives. But he gives Esther and Mordecai authority to write concerning the Jews as they please in the king's name and seal it with the royal ring. So the scribes are called again. This time the writing moves in the other direction. Letters are written to the Jews, to the satraps, governors, and officials of all the provinces, from India to Kush, in the script of every province and the language of every people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. The king allows the Jews in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy any armed force that might attack them, and to plunder the goods of those who come against them. Couriers ride out on swift horses used in the king's service. The new decree goes quickly through the empire. The couriers who once carried dread now carry hope. The roads are the same roads. The imperial system is the same system. The languages are the same languages. But the message has changed. That too is part of the reversal. What had been used to spread fear is now used to spread permission to live. In distant towns, Jewish families who had been counting down to death hear another decree read aloud. They still must gather. They still must defend themselves. The threat is not imaginary, but they are no longer legally abandoned to slaughter. The empire that had signed their death has now signed their right to stand. Hope travels by horse. And Mordecai leaves the king's presence wearing royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. The city of Susa shouts and rejoices. For the Jews there is light and gladness and joy and honor. In every province and city where the king's command comes, there is gladness among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. Many people of the land declare themselves Jews because fear of the Jews has fallen on them. The story that began with sackcloth now moves towards celebration. The city once confused by death is now filled with joy. Susa has felt many moods in this story. It has been festive under the king's wealth. It has been confused under the death decree. It has seen Mordecai in sackcloth and Haman in pride. It has watched public honor given to the man once ignored. Now it hears another sound, joy. Joy after fear has a different texture from ordinary happiness. It is deeper. It carries memory inside it. The people rejoice not because nothing threatened them, but because the threat did not prevail. They feast not because the story was easy, but because sorrow has been turned. They send gifts not because they forgot the danger, but because life feels newly precious after death has passed close. That kind of joy is almost like breathing again after being underwater. Light, gladness, honor. The words come like sunrise after a long night. The date still arrives. Deliverance does not mean the day disappears from the calendar. The 13th of Adar still comes. Dawn still breaks over the empire. Enemies still rise. Houses still brace for what may happen. But the meaning of the day has changed. The people who were supposed to be helpless have been given authority to gather. The scattered become organized. The vulnerable become defended. The date chosen against them becomes the date on which they stand and live. Sometimes God does not remove the day we fear. Sometimes he changes what the day becomes. The 13th day of Adar. The day Haman had chosen by lot. The day the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain mastery over them. But the reverse happens. The Jews gain mastery over those who hate them. Throughout the provinces, the Jews gather in their cities and defend themselves. No one can stand against them, because the fear of them has fallen on all peoples. Officials help them because the fear of Mordecai has fallen on them, for Mordecai is great in the king's house, and his fame spreads through the provinces. In Susa, the Jews strike those who seek their harm. This part of Esther can feel difficult because it is not sentimental. The deliverance of the Jews is not presented as a quiet change of mood in their enemies. The enemies really come. The threat Haman unleashed has real supporters. There are people across the empire who are willing to use the day against the Jews, and those people must be resisted. The story does not pretend hatred dissolves on its own once a villain dies. Haman is gone, but Haman's decree has awakened forces beyond him. So the Jews gather. They defend their lives. They stand together in their cities. The reversal is not passive. It requires courage from the people, not only courage from Esther. Men and families who had waited under the date now face it. And when they survive, the rest that follows is not shallow. It is rest after danger, rest after standing, rest after the fear that the whole people might disappear. That is why the celebration matters. The feast is not denial of the battle. It is the proper answer to survival. In the provinces, they defend their lives and gain relief from their enemies. The text is careful to say they do not lay hands on the plunder. That detail is repeated because it matters. Haman's decree had allowed plunder. The counter-decree allowed the Jews to defend themselves and take goods from attackers. But the Jews do not grasp at wealth. They do not make the day about enrichment. Their restraint separates their deliverance from greed. They fight to live, not to become like the enemy who sought gain from their destruction. This restraint also echoes older wounds in Israel's memory. There had been times in the history of Israel when obedience failed around the taking of forbidden spoil. Here, in Esther's story, the people survive without laying hands on plunder. The day becomes marked by relief and rest, not by greed, though the decree permitted it. Their aim is not greed. It is survival, justice, deliverance from annihilation. The sons of Haman are killed. Esther requests that the bodies be displayed and that the Jews in Susa be allowed another day to deal with remaining enemies. The fighting ends. The fear lifts. The people rest. Rest is one of the key words of the ending. Not merely victory. Rest. The Jewish people had lived under a death sentence for months. They had fasted and mourned. They had waited for the chosen day to come. And when the day passed, they were still alive. Their children were still alive. Their households were still standing. The decree meant to erase them had become the occasion for their enemies to fall instead. So they celebrated. The 14th day of Adar became a day of feasting and gladness. In Susa, where the struggle lasted another day, the 15th became the day of rest and feasting. Jews in villages and open towns made the 14th a day of gladness, feasting, a holiday, and sending gifts of food to one another. Mordecai wrote these things down. Memory needs form. Without form, even great deliverance can fade into a story told loosely for a generation and then forgotten. Mordecai writes so that the people will remember with their bodies and calendars a yearly feast, gifts of food, gifts to the poor, a date kept by children who were not born when the first decree went out. That is how rescue becomes identity. Purim teaches the people to rehearse reversal. Every year, they remember that the lot was cast, but the lot did not rule. Every year, they remember that the enemy planned, but the plan was overturned. Every year, they remember that hidden providence is still providence, and sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of the king, near and far. He instructed them to keep these days every year, because in those days the Jews got relief from their enemies, and the month was turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday. Sorrow into gladness, mourning into a holiday. That is the heart of Purim. The lots had been cast to destroy them, and the lots became the name of their deliverance. What Haman meant as a date of death became a date of memory. Every year, the people would remember that their story had nearly been cut off, and yet it had continued. They would feast. They would send portions to one another. They would give gifts to the poor. They would turn survival into generosity. Esther the queen, daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew gave full written authority confirming the practice of Purim. Letters were sent with words of peace and truth. The days were established, remembered, and kept by the Jews, their descendants, and all who joined them. The book closes quietly. It closes with administration, record, rank, and peace. That may seem less dramatic than the banquets and decrees, but it is fitting. The work of deliverance does not end with one day of crisis. After danger passes, a people still needs wise leadership. They need peace spoken over them. They need welfare sought in ordinary policy, daily decisions, and continued advocacy. Mordecai's greatness is not only that he was honored publicly, it is that he used his honor for his people. He did not become Haman in Jewish clothing. He did not use elevation merely to feed himself. He sought welfare. He spoke peace. That is the right ending for a story about power reversed and redeemed. King Ahasuerus imposes tribute on the land and the coastlands of the sea. All the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, are written in the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. Mordecai the Jew is second in rank to King Ahasuerus. Mordecai's rise is one of the final reversals. Haman had been advanced above the officials. Haman had carried the ring. Haman had expected honor. Haman had planned death. By the end, Haman is gone, and Mordecai stands in the place of influence, not as a proud man demanding worship, but as one who seeks the good of his people. That contrast is the moral shape of the ending. Two men were lifted near the king. One used his nearness to serve grievance. One used his nearness to serve peace. Power revealed them both. That is often what power does. It does not create the heart from nothing. It gives the heart room to show itself. Haman's heart grew cruel when honored. Mordecai's heart remained turned toward the welfare of others. So the book lets Mordecai's final description be simple and strong. Great among the Jews, approved by many of his brothers, seeking their welfare, speaking peace. That is a good way for a life to be remembered. Great among the Jews, popular with many of his brothers, seeking the welfare of his people and speaking peace to all his people. That is the final picture. Mordecai, once in sackcloth at the gate, now honored in the empire. Esther, once an orphan in Mordecai's care, now the queen whose courage opened the door of deliverance. Haman, once towering in pride, gone from the story by the very instrument he prepared for another. The Jewish people, once marked for death, now alive, gathered, defended, and celebrating. And God, never named, everywhere present. That is what makes Esther so powerful. It is not a story where the hiddenness of God means absence. It is a story where hiddenness becomes its own kind of revelation. The sleepless night, the forgotten record, the timing of Esther's favor, the delay of the banquets, the reversal of Haman's plan, the unbreakable decree answered by another decree, the scattered people preserved inside a foreign empire. None of it is random, but almost none of it announces itself as miracle while it is happening. That is why Esther feels so close to ordinary life. Most of our days do not come with pillars of cloud. Most decisions are not explained by angels. Most moments of courage come before we know the ending. We see only the court in front of us, the risk in front of us, the message asking us to speak, the silence asking whether we will hide inside safety or step forward for the sake of someone else. Esther stepped forward, not loudly, not with certainty that she would live. With fasting behind her and courage beneath her robes, she stepped into the inner court, and the scepter was extended. The story of Esther is not only about becoming queen, it is about what the crown was for. Beauty brought Esther into the palace, but courage made her a deliverer. Favor opened the door, but love for her people carried her through it. Position became calling. Hidden identity became open intercession. The girl raised by Mordecai became the woman who stood between a death decree and her people. And Mordecai, too, teaches us something. He walked every day near the court of the women to learn how Esther was. He refused to bow to Haman. He mourned openly when the decree went out. He spoke truth to Esther, not gently smoothing over danger, but calling her to see the possibility that her whole road had been moving toward this moment. He could not enter the king's inner court, but he could send the message. He could remind her who she was. He could believe that deliverance would come, even if he did not know how. And in the end, he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace. The book began with the King of Persia displaying his glory. It ends with a Jewish exile seeking peace for his people. That is a better greatness. Not the greatness of showing wealth for 180 days. Not the greatness of feasts and golden vessels and marble floors. Not the greatness of being obeyed because people are afraid. The greatness of protecting life. The greatness of speaking peace. The greatness of using influence for the vulnerable. The greatness of remembering that power, when it is placed in your hands, is never meant only for yourself. There is one more thing to notice before the story grows quiet. Esther's courage does not come from seeking importance. She does not push herself toward the throne as a child. She does not build the crisis. She does not create the danger so she can become heroic inside it. Much of her story happens to her before she acts within it. She is orphaned, raised by Mordecai, taken to the palace, chosen by the king, hidden in identity. Then suddenly the hiddenness can no longer remain only hidden. Her life teaches that courage is not always choosing the stage. Sometimes courage is being faithful when the stage arrives around you. And Haman's life teaches the opposite lesson. Pride is never satisfied by enough. It can eat honors and still starve. It can sit close to the throne and still be undone by one man at a gate. It can build a gallows for another and fail to understand that it is building its own downfall. The story lets both lives stand beside each other. Esther's humility, Haman's pride, Mordecai's faithfulness, the king's instability, the empire's power, the people's vulnerability, and over all of it, the quiet faithfulness of God. No named miracle, no visible hand in the sky, but deliverance all the same. Before the final quiet settles, let us walk once more through the whole shape of the story, not quickly, but gently, the way you might trace a path in the sand before the wind covers it. A king gives a feast to show his glory. A queen refuses to be displayed. A decree removes her. A young orphan, hidden among the exiles, is taken into the palace. A guardian keeps watch. A girl becomes queen and keeps her people secret. A faithful man uncovers a plot and receives no reward. A proud man rises and demands honor. A Jewish man refuses to bow. A lot is cast. A death date is chosen. A decree goes out. A city is confused. A people mourns. A queen is told the truth. A hard message asks whether she has come to the kingdom for this moment. A fast begins. A woman dresses in royal robes and stands where she has not been called. A king extends a scepter. A banquet is prepared. A second banquet is requested. A proud man builds a gallows. A king cannot sleep. A forgotten record is read. An enemy is forced to honor the man he hates. A queen speaks. A villain is exposed. A gallows receives the one who built it. A second decree rides out through the empire. The people gather. The day turns. Mourning becomes gladness. Purim is remembered. That is the road of Esther. It is a road of reversals, but none of the reversals is obvious at the beginning. When Vashti is removed, no one says, "This is how deliverance will begin." When Esther is taken, no one says, "This is how a people will be saved." When Mordecai's good deed is forgotten, no one says, "This delay will protect his life." When the king cannot sleep, no one says, "The empire is about to turn." The meaning is hidden until the moments gather. That is why the story is so restful in a strange way. Not because it is free from danger. It is full of danger. But because it teaches that meaning does not have to be visible in the moment for God to be working. A hidden God can still be a faithful God. A quiet heaven can still be an active heaven. A delayed reward can still be kept for the right night. Esther's story gives no permission for passivity. Esther must act. Mordecai must speak. The Jews must gather and defend themselves. Letters must be written. Roads must be ridden. Feasts must be established. The hidden providence of God does not cancel human courage. It calls it forth. That is one of the most important balances in the book. God is working. Esther must still go. Deliverance will arise. Esther must still decide whether she will be part of it. The people are held by covenant mercy. They must still gather when the day comes. Faith does not make courage unnecessary. Faith gives courage somewhere to stand. And perhaps that is why Esther has been loved for so long. It speaks to people who do not feel as if they live in the days of open miracles. It speaks to people under pressure from systems larger than themselves. It speaks to people who carry hidden identities, hidden griefs, hidden callings. It speaks to people who have access to certain rooms and not to others. It speaks to people who need to know when to wait and when to step forward. There is no burning bush in Esther, but there is a door. There is no Red Sea, but there is a court. There is no prophet thundering in the palace, but there is a woman saying, "If I perish, I perish." There is no visible angel blocking Haman's road, but there is a sleepless night. There is no voice from heaven naming the plan, but there is Purim, year after year, saying the plan was real. So the story rests not in spectacle, but in trust. Trust that God sees the people whose names empires barely notice. Trust that God remembers the faithful deed that courts forget. Trust that God can turn a date chosen by an enemy into a date of joy. Trust that the unseen thread is not weak simply because it is unseen. It is also worth staying with Esther's hiddenness for a moment longer. For much of the story, Esther lives with an identity that is real but not public. She is Hadassah, daughter of her people, child of exile, raised by Mordecai. She is also Esther, Queen of Persia, dressed in royal garments, known in the court by a name the empire can pronounce. Neither name is fake exactly, but one is deeper. One is tied to covenant, memory, family, and the people whose fate will become her own. Many people know that kind of divided life in some way. The face shown in public, the story carried in private, the name others know, the griefs and loyalties they do not see. Esther's moment comes when the hidden identity must become visible. She cannot save her people while remaining only what the court assumes her to be. At the second banquet, she joins herself openly to those under threat. My life, my people. That is the movement from hiddenness to intercession. She risks being known truthfully, because truth has become necessary for life. And Mordecai's hiddenness is different, but also important. He is not hidden in the same way Esther is. He tells the servants he is a Jew. He refuses to bow. He mourns openly. Yet his faithfulness is hidden from reward for a time. The book of Chronicles contains his deed, but the palace forgets him until the night God chooses. One person's identity is hidden. Another person's faithfulness is hidden. God sees both. The king, by contrast, is always visible. His feasts are visible. His decrees are visible. His anger is visible. His generosity is visible. But visibility does not equal wisdom. Ahasuerus can be at the center of the empire and still seem strangely dependent on the counsel, moods, and reports of others. He is powerful, but not deeply discerning. He signs too quickly. He asks too late. He gives rings to dangerous men and then to faithful ones. The story does not need to mock him loudly. It simply shows him. Power without wisdom is unstable. And Haman is visible too, but in another way. He wants to be seen. He wants the bowing, the procession, the honor, the sound of his name attached to greatness. Yet the more he reaches for glory, the smaller he becomes. His inner world shrinks until all his happiness depends on Mordecai's posture. He is surrounded by signs of success and still cannot rest. Esther teaches a quieter kind of greatness, not the greatness of being displayed, the greatness of standing in the right place at the right time for the life of others, not the greatness of demanding that people bow, the greatness of bowing the self beneath a calling, not the greatness of being impossible to offend, the greatness of moving through fear into costly love. This is why the story can be calming even while it is tense. It tells the truth about danger, but it also tells the truth about character. Pride destroys itself. Faithfulness may be delayed but not lost. Courage may tremble but still move. Hidden providence may be quiet but never absent. The palace of Susa is long gone now. The marble floors, the golden vessels, the feasts of Ahasuerus, the anxious council of officials, the angry pride of Haman, the hurried couriers riding under royal command. All of it belongs to an ancient world. But the shape of the story remains close. People still live under powers larger than themselves. People still wonder whether silence will keep them safe. People still face moments when they must decide whether the place they occupy is only for comfort or also for service. Esther does not answer that question with theory. She answers by walking across the inner court, toward the throne, toward the raised scepter, toward the feast, toward the sentence that exposes Haman, toward the deliverance of her people, step by step. That is often how courage happens. Not all at once. The first step is hearing the truth. The next is admitting the danger. The next is asking others to fast. The next is dressing for the moment. The next is entering the room. The next is waiting for wisdom. The next is speaking when silence can no longer be faithful. Esther's courage is made of steps, and that is gentler than imagining courage as something a person either has or does not have. Esther grows into the act. She receives Mordecai's word. She calls for the fast. She accepts the cost. She enters. She invites. She waits. She speaks. Each step leads to the next, and through each step, the hidden hand is still there. There is another quiet mercy in the ending of Esther. The people do not only survive, they are given a way to remember together. Survival by itself can leave a person shaking and silent. A family may live through danger and still not know how to carry the memory. A people may be spared and yet slowly forget the shape of the mercy. So Mordecai and Esther do something wise. They give the memory a yearly rhythm, feasting, gladness, gifts of food, gifts to the poor. These are ordinary actions, but they become holy memory. Eating together says, we are still here. Sending food says, our joy is shared. Giving to the poor says, no one should be left outside the celebration of deliverance. The story that began with royal feasts of excess ends with a feast of remembered mercy. That contrast matters. Ahasuerus feasted to display wealth. Purim feasts to remember rescue. The king's feast looked inward at glory. Purim looks outward in generosity. The king's feast led to a queen being removed. Purim remembers a queen whose courage helped preserve a people. One feast showed the emptiness of pride. The other celebrates the fullness of deliverance. And that is why the end of Esther does not feel like the end of danger forever. History would continue. The Jewish people would face other empires, other threats, other exiles, other sorrows. But Purim gave them a story to carry into future fear. It taught them that the lot is not Lord. The decree is not final simply because it is sealed. The enemy's date can become God's day of reversal. Children born generations later could ask why the gifts were sent, why the feast was kept, why the scroll was read, why the name of Haman was remembered with disgust and the courage of Esther with honor. And the answer would carry the old story forward. We were in danger. We were not forgotten. Mourning became gladness. That is a memory worth keeping. It is also worth noticing that Esther and Mordecai do not save the people in order to make themselves the center of worship. The book records their courage and honor, but the deepest movement of the story points beyond them. They are instruments, human and limited, wise in some moments, afraid in others, faithful when the decisive hour comes. The hidden God works through them without turning them into something more than human. That makes the story gentler. Esther does not have to be fearless to be faithful. Mordecai does not have to know every detail to speak the needed word. The people do not have to understand the whole plan in order to fast, wait, gather, and later rejoice. They live the next step given to them, and the next, and the next, until the story has turned. So when the story finally grows quiet, it does not leave us with the noise of the palace feast, but with the deeper quiet of a people preserved. The first feast was loud with self-display. The last feast is full of memory. The first decree came from wounded pride. The last letters come with peace and truth. The first queen was removed because a king wanted to show his power. The second queen risked her life so that power would be forced to see the people it had endangered. The first public display centered on a king's wealth. The final public joy centers on deliverance. That is the beautiful reversal of Esther. Everything that seemed to belong to empire is quietly turned. The palace becomes the place where a hidden Jewish queen speaks. The royal records become the place where a forgotten Jewish man is remembered. The king's ring becomes the tool not only of danger, but of rescue. The date chosen by an enemy becomes the date kept by the people of God with gladness. And though the book never writes the divine name, the pattern itself becomes a kind of witness. The silence is not empty. The hiddenness is not abandonment. The covenant is still alive in exile. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is still preserving his people, even in Susa, even under Persia, even through feasts, decrees, sleeplessness, courage, and reversal. That is the rest Esther offers at the end, not the rest of having understood every hidden thing, the rest of knowing that hidden things are still held. And maybe that is why Esther belongs so naturally to the night. At night, people often feel the hiddenness of things more sharply. The room is quiet. The work of the day has paused. Questions that were easy to outrun in daylight come near again. The future is not visible. The meaning of delays is not clear. The heart wonders what is being arranged beyond what it can see. Esther does not answer every question. It gives a story instead. A story where the most important turn happens while the king is awake in the dark. A story where a forgotten line in a record becomes the hinge of mercy. A story where courage is prepared in fasting before it is seen in royal robes. A story where the name of God is hidden, but the faithfulness of God is not absent. So the quiet of the night does not have to mean nothing is happening. It may simply mean the work is hidden. For now. Let that be the final shape of the story in your mind. A palace full of noise becoming quiet. A hidden queen becoming brave. A proud enemy falling into his own design. A scattered people gathering to stand. A day of fear becoming a day of rest. The story does not ask you to force the hidden things into view tonight. It simply invites you to trust that hidden does not mean lost. The scroll may be closed for a while. The record may sit unread. The morning may not yet reveal what the night is arranging. But the Lord is able to remember what people forget. He is able to turn what enemies design. He is able to place courage inside ordinary human fear. And he is able to bring his people through. That is enough for tonight. Let us also stay for a little while with the Jewish families scattered through the empire, because the decree did not fall on Esther and Mordecai alone. The story names the palace because the palace is where the decisions are made, but the pain of those decisions spreads far beyond the walls of Susa. In one province, a father hears the decree and goes home quieter than before. In another, a mother looks at her children and counts the months. In another, elders gather and remember older enemies, older sorrows, older promises. In another, young people who have grown up among Persians suddenly learn how fragile their place has been. The decree takes the private hatred of Haman and multiplies it across geography. That is what unjust systems can do. They can take one man's malice and give it roads, horses, scribes, seals, and official language. They can make evil sound orderly. They can dress cruelty in law. But the same spread of danger also becomes the stage for a wider deliverance. Because when the reversal comes, it too travels across the empire. Not only Esther survives, not only Mordecai is honored, the scattered people in distant places receive the word that they may stand. The deliverance becomes large enough to match the danger. This is one of the comforts of the story. Haman's hatred was wide. God's deliverance was wider. And in the middle of all this, Esther remains a human person inside a palace. We should not make her courage feel mechanical. She has attendants. She has routines. She has royal obligations. She may have had to keep her face calm while fear moved beneath it. During the 3 days of fasting, the palace still needed a queen. Servants may have come and gone. Lamps may have been lit. Messages may have been brought. The ordinary world does not always stop just because a person's inner life is in crisis. That is another reason the story feels true. Sometimes the most important decision of a life is made while ordinary duties continue around it. Food is prepared, doors open and close. Someone asks a routine question. And inside, a person is deciding whether to risk everything. Esther's quiet strength grows in that hidden place before it is seen in the court. Mordecai's grief grows openly in the city, but Esther's courage grows behind palace walls. Both matter. One tears his garments where everyone can see. One puts on royal robes after fasting where almost no one understands what it means. The same crisis produces different kinds of faithfulness in different places. There is a lesson in that too. Not everyone stands in the same location. Mordecai cannot do what Esther can do. Esther cannot do what Mordecai can do. The Jews in Susa cannot do what the Jews in distant provinces must do when the day arrives. Each has a place. Each has a form of courage. Each is woven into the deliverance. When Esther enters the court, she carries more than her own life. She carries Mordecai's message. She carries the hunger of the fast. She carries the cries of the people. She carries the hidden name Hadassah beneath the royal name Esther. She carries the orphaned child, the adopted daughter, the queen, the Jew, all together in one body stepping across polished stone. The king sees her standing there. The scepter rises. And before she ever speaks her main request, the story has already turned toward mercy. But mercy still has steps. A banquet. A second invitation. A proud man going home. A gallows built in the night. A king awake in the darkness. A record read aloud. A morning humiliation. A feast where truth finally comes. The sequence is so carefully arranged that the story invites us to trust timing. Not rushed timing. Not timing we would have chosen if we were in charge. Hidden timing. Timing that lets Haman's pride reveal itself fully. Timing that lets Mordecai's unrewarded faithfulness come forward precisely when needed. Timing that lets Esther speak when the king's attention has been drawn and Haman's downfall has already begun. In the book of Esther, the turning of the story does not feel like a single door opening. It feels like many small hinges moving together. One feast years earlier. One queen removed. One orphan taken. One man walking daily near a court. One plot overheard. One record written. One promotion of a proud official. One refusal to bow. One decree. One fast. One entrance into the court. One delayed request. One sleepless night. One scroll. One sentence in the chronicles. One question from the king. One proud answer from Haman. One public honor for Mordecai. One accusation at the banquet. One gallows reversed. One new decree. One day of defense. One feast of remembrance. The story is built from moments that would have seemed disconnected while they happened. That is often how providence feels from inside time. We see fragments. God sees the whole woven thing. When Purim is established, the people are not merely remembering that they escaped danger. They are remembering the pattern of reversal. They are remembering that the lot cast against them did not have final authority. They are remembering that even in exile, even under a foreign king, even when God's name was not written across the visible page, they were still held by covenant mercy. That memory becomes a yearly act of joy, not because the fear was small, because the deliverance was real. Feasting becomes defiance against despair. Gifts become testimony that life has been preserved. Giving to the poor becomes a way of making sure that joy is not kept only by those who can afford celebration. The whole community practices gladness. Sorrow had isolated them in fear. Deliverance gathers them into shared joy. That is the movement of Esther. Hiddenness to revelation. Mourning to feasting. Danger to rest. Pride to downfall. Silence to speech. A scattered people to a people remembering together. And all of it begins, or seems to begin, with the glittering foolishness of a royal feast. That is why no moment in this story should be dismissed too quickly. The opening feast matters. The queen's refusal matters. The orphan's beauty matters. The guardian's warning matters. The unrewarded act matters. The sleepless night matters. The date on the calendar matters. The written letters matter. The gifts sent afterward matter. God can work through what seems official and what seems accidental, through public decrees and private grief, through the courage of one woman and the insomnia of one king. That is the quiet wonder of Esther. As the story comes to rest, imagine Susa at night after the danger has passed. The palace is quieter now. The courtyards are still. The lamps burn low along the stone corridors. Somewhere beyond the walls, Jewish families sit together with food and relief and stories already beginning to form. Children hear that they were almost lost and that they live because deliverance came. Elders remember the fasting, the decree, the fear, the waiting. They speak of Esther. They speak of Mordecai. They speak of Haman's fall. And perhaps, even when the book does not write the name, they understand whom to thank. The hidden God had not forgotten them. The silence had not been emptiness. The palace had not been beyond his reach. The decree had not been stronger than his covenant mercy. And you can rest with that thought tonight. There may be parts of your life that feel like the middle chapters of Esther. A decree has gone out, but the rescue has not yet been seen. A door is closed, but you do not know what opening it may be preparing. A good thing has been written down, but not yet remembered. A night feels restless without explaining why. A choice asks for courage before the outcome is visible. The story of Esther does not ask you to pretend that waiting is easy. It simply whispers that the hidden God is not idle in the waiting. Not every good work of God is visible while it is happening. Not every rescue announces itself at the beginning. Sometimes the thread is hidden. Sometimes the book is quiet. Sometimes the night seems ordinary, and the king cannot sleep. And somewhere in that ordinary restlessness, the whole story begins to turn. So let the night be quiet. Let your breathing slow. You do not have to see every thread tonight. You do not have to understand every delay. You do not have to know how the whole story will be turned. Esther did not know everything when she stepped into the court. Mordecai did not know every detail when he put on sackcloth. The Jewish people did not know how deliverance would come when they fasted and wept. But deliverance came, in the right time, through hidden ways, with courage, with mercy, with reversal. The God who worked in the silence of Esther is still able to work in silence now. The God who preserved his people in Susa is not absent from the quiet places of your life. The God who turned mourning into gladness can hold what feels heavy tonight. So let the story settle. Let the burden loosen. Let the palace fade into night. The feast is over. The danger has passed. The people rest. And you can rest too. Sleep well.